Well, on Monday, we heard that there is no evidence to establish that 7 persons shot dead by police at Manso-Nkwanta in the Ashanti region were armed robbers. That piece of information was from the Information Ministry. According to the statement signed by Kojo Nkrumah, the findings from a facts-finding committee, which was set up to look into the killings that sparked violence in Manso-Nkwanta, which is the capital of the Amansie West District. Well, Roland Walker is boxing all these together in his conversation with security expert Emmanuel Sowate. But before that, Ohime Nteria has been speaking to some family members of the people who lost their lives.
For sure, to the family is a moment of mixed reaction, judging from the fact that although we are celebrating the outcome of the report, the other side of the coin is that we are also mourning the departure of our mother, who is Babani Kende. She happened to be the mother of one of the deceased, Baban Kende. So, undoubtedly, she never lived to see this day, to the cleansing of what? Of her son. So to us, we think that we are satisfied with the components of the report. But on the other side, we hope, or we would have wished, that the mother would be alive today to see it, to the cleansing of her child.
And before she died, what was she talking about? The fact that her son has been tagged as an armed robber, or would you say maybe this tag, the sorrow, contributed to her early demise?
Yeah, she is an elderly woman for sure, and she, this tag of armed robbery on her child has predisposed her to what? To so many elderly conditions. Some things like this can predispose you to what? To raising even your pressure. And the only thing that comes out of her mouth whenever she speaks to us is that, when is Baban Kende coming back? When is Baban Kende coming back? And she never lived to what? To see to it that, yes, indeed, the cleansing that we have wanted to happen would happen today.
We had a meeting at the RCC, Regional Coordinating Council, based on the report with the Zongo Minister, Mustafa Hamid, and MCE of Asokore Mampo, Honorable Alidu, and some government leading personnel that we met today, being all about the report. Well, what they told us in the report that they will bring it out, and Minister of Information assured us around 12 in the afternoon he will broadcast it out for everybody to see it. Well, what they told us, and also we were waiting for his release, so we are very happy to see what is in the report. But well, it's not that we are happy in what is inside the report. We are appealing to the government to whatever it says inside the report, you should act on it.
Okay, so as a family, are you satisfied so far?
Yeah, well, if satisfaction is 100%, we are satisfied for 60%, until we've seen that what they've written in the report, that they will vindicate the police officers who did that killing has been done, before we will be 100% satisfied with it.
And we go live to the University of Ghana, Legon campus. Roland Walker is having a conversation on the back of this with security expert Emmanuel Sowate. Roland, over to you.
Well, thank you, Mama V. And just looking at that clip in itself also give us a certain idea as to what really may have transpired. And they're all following the committee's report that has been made public. Well, even though the report really has not been made public, but at least following that statement by the Information Minister. Now, we know the reactions of those concerned, the protagonists, and those who have been the victims and their families. Well, subsequently, we need to do more critical analysis on what may have happened, what may have been the genesis or the premises for which this may have transpired, and look at the outcome of the committee's report, and going forward, what could be done to address the current challenges service, with the reports, and also what we have to do with the police service going forward. We have a security analyst with us, somebody who has great experience in the field of doing the analysis on conflict and its management. Emmanuel Sowate is here with me. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Well, you've been monitoring, observing the issues and analyzing them, but how did we get here in the first place?
Normally, when such issues come to the public domain, there are two sources. There are the sources that are in the media, and there are the sources that the direct operatives at the tactical level, so to speak, would also bring to the fore if offered the opportunity. So it depends on the source that you are looking at. But if you are looking at how we got here, I think that the major issues I want to look at before I delve deeper has to do with the issue of the history of the police service. I think the police service has had its good part and also bad part. When it comes to, for example, the Dansuma killing and the Taifa killing, people are too quick to recall those incidences and the initial quote and not quote perceived attempt of a cover-up. And so when you have that legacy, very often when such issues come up, very close observers will want to interrogate the sequence, the events, and see whether it is as it is or there might be much more to it. But as we go on, I'll explain further.
Yes, but then we have to start with the police service. The police service, as we get on to the main issues with this incident, seem to have that history. Why is that?
No, I think it's not peculiar to the Ghana Police Service. It's referring to sometimes having some officers trying to cover up, to justify their modus operandi or a particular action they had taken. It is not unique to the Ghana Police Service. The other thing is that when it comes to, I want to focus my attention on legitimacy because it holds so much importance to the effectiveness and efficiency of any police service. Now, when people think that, for example, the police treats people with dignity and respect, they treat people with dignity and respect, and not only dignity and respect, but also the ability of the service to offer people the opportunity to explain themselves. When people go through those processes, a number of things happen. In the short term, sometimes the most effective way of achieving an objective might not be sensitive to human rights, rule of law. But that is where the temptation lies. If you are not careful as a police officer and you think short term, you might take certain drastic measures that to you, it might solve a particular issue, but then the cascading effect on the broader police institution and going forward as a police institution, you have some form of delegitimization process. And when that delegitimization process is set in place, now a caveat here, people sometimes, I'm speaking as a criminologist, people sometimes think that legality is the same as legitimacy. In particular school of thought that I belong, we separate the two, and I explain why. The legality is purely law, law. But then to acquire legitimacy, there are two types. There's what we call the audience legitimacy and then the power holder legitimacy.
On whose part?
Okay, so I explained that. Now, we are talking about police, so let's center our focus of attention on police. So the power holder legitimacy is the police officer. So, for example, you can ask a police officer, how do you justify all the powers that the state has invested in you to do policing work? Most of the time, you might hear them saying that the law, but some will go ahead and say that you need that law to be able to do your policing. Then you have the audience legitimacy. The audience legitimacy basically talks about you and I, who are not police officers. To what extent do we think that the police have the legitimacy in our sight? For example, do we think that the police treat us with respect, dignity? Do they offer us the opportunity to explain ourselves? Now, when these things are done, it is called like seed moments, sowing moments. Other criminologists will call it the teaching moments. Now, teaching because when the police officer interacts with an individual group of people, he or she leaves an impression. And it is that impression that would characterize the relationship between the people and the police. And that is how people will trust the police. And whatever they say, whatever actions they do, within using their discretion, people will trust that it is true. But then, if, for example, at the individual level, maybe you take money on the side, or people feel that they are not treated with respect and dignity, what happens is that in the minds of the audience, you are delegitimizing yourself. And so when there are encounters, even if what the police is saying is true, because of that delegitimization in the minds of people, they start from the position of mistrust. Yeah. And that is where the challenge lies.
Okay, but at the end of the day, for this incident, there was a narration in that press conference by the police commander saying that these are the things that we found out and so led to the incident. Give us a certain narration surrounding what really transpired. We're told that the 7 who, of course, lost their lives were part of a gang of criminals or perhaps may have been involved in all that. Of course, what the committee says is what has been the content of that press release by the information minister. At what point does the police officer, and if we take the Asawase incident for example, or the Manso-Nkwanta also incident for example, at what point does a police officer say that I'm taking a decision spot on, in which using that discretion and also being backed by law could make a mistake, and then thereafter there's a thought to try to legitimize it?
Okay. So you said a number of things. The discharge of firearms, I'm sure that's what you had in mind.
Exactly.
Specifically, because you can use discretion in arresting people, and that is not fatal.
Yes.
So I'm sure you're talking about, okay.
Yeah, I'm talking about, yes.
The
You making
fatality.
that decision when you know that your actions could, yes, result in some fatalities. Or
exactly. Yes, I wanted to be sure, because you can use your discretion in a wide range. Okay. Now, when you look at the police service instructions, and the CI 76, I'm a bit confused here. It's referring to whether it's in the CI 76, but I'm sure it's in the service instructions. It is when your life is in immediate danger. I mean, generally it is known.
As an officer.
A police officer. Now, let our viewers also understand that you are using officer in the generic term. So it can be a corporal or a senior police officer. Okay.
Well, that's senior or an OR.
Okay. So when your life is in immediate danger, not in the future, not 2 days after, immediate danger. Even so, the idea behind the room to operate is to shoot below the knee, to incapacitate the person as much as possible.
That's what's in the service instruction.
Oh yeah, generally, yes. And the police officers, they know it. I mean, they know it. It's something they know. That is the idea. That's the ideal situation. And as much as possible, your ability, because you see, when you are standing and you are firing, it's different from when the person is running. When you are in a dark situation where the place is poorly lit and you hear a shot and you are not putting on a vest, or you are putting on a bulletproof vest and a ballistic helmet, but you are not too sure how to engage, sometimes you might not see the person to shoot below the knee, but sometimes also pure panic, and sometimes in certain cases you think you have to kill the person. And the reason sometimes is that the idea is that sometimes the legal process is too slow and too cumbersome. And that is what I said initially, that sometimes when you have a challenge, you're referring to the police officer, the temptation to think short term. How do we deal with this situation now? And not think of the long-term consequences. That delicate balance of deciding that this short-term action is inimical to our long-term legitimacy is very difficult. So sometimes they will kill quickly. But yes, it is generally that you discharge your firearm when your life is in immediate danger, and sometimes too when a convicted robber is fleeing and you cannot arrest.
In this instance, for example, just like in some instances, and I've been on police soaps several times, they displayed firearms and then also some ammunition, so to speak, or some bullets that were also attached. I mean, it's supposed to tell the audience or the public or us that the people, so to speak, that we engaged were armed. And can't just the wielding of a second or a third force of any dangerous weapon be a decision point for the police to take a certain discretion that my life is in danger or the operation is in danger?
Okay, so it depends. It depends on the briefing that you had before you embarked on that operation, because briefings and intelligence I'm intelligence biased, so I place a lot of emphasis on intelligence. So if you have solid intelligence and the briefing is appropriate. Now, there are different types of briefings. Some of the briefings can come maybe 2 days before, so you have time to plan. Sometimes even on your way to the scene, you might have new intelligence if you have strong informants, or even when you start engaging. Now, what I'm not too sure is whether they are talking about bladed weapon or firearm, and the angle from which the person and the closeness. So, for example, if the person is maybe an arm's length with a dagger, I mean, that is a threat to your life. Because My understanding is that when your life is in immediate danger from firearm, it can be from a club, it can be from a dagger, so it depends.
Weapon is a weapon.
Okay, so I don't say a weapon is a weapon just like that. It depends on so many circumstances, you know, the closeness to the combat, I say the combatant, the offensive person, or the person attacking the attacker, so to speak. It depends on the person, the size relative to your size, their numbers. It depends. The environment, is it well lit? Are you familiar? The briefing.
In several instances, and we're talking about a group of people who come from a certain homogenic environment. So maybe they belong to the Zongos or belong to a certain demographic. Does that also become an informed position for which the police, because of the role they may be playing in their incident, to take a decision? Can there be some lack of indiscretion or prejudice in their decision making? So let's say Zongos, or maybe people from certain extraction, or maybe the appearance of the person, or maybe a certain caliber of people, educated, not educated. Could that also influence the decision that they may take at some point in time?
Yeah, talking about stereotype, and there's something we say in this field of ours: you over-suspect and under-police. And so usually people can be stereotyped that these people are fond of violence without necessarily backing it with academic,
yes,
rigorously researched analysis and data. So yes, it's not peculiar to Ghana. It's not peculiar to West Africa. It's not peculiar to Africa.
For example, in the West, we're told the way the police are perceived in America to treat black people, there's that perception. Maybe that black people are violent, they engage in drugs, etc., or maybe may not have proper means of employment, or are not more responsible than the average white, etc. So could there be some of those variables that lead to such decisions to be taken at that point in time of engagement?
It depends on that. I don't normally like to generalize. I take issues case by case basis. But drawing from literature elsewhere, it is true that certain communities are over-suspected and under-policed. It's a common feature in policing. And that is where you are able to distill the individual professional police officer who has been well trained from those who have been trained, if the training is done well. Okay, so there's always, to some extent, disconnect between knowledge and practice. But then when you train and retrain and train, and you have strong accountability mechanism, then some of these challenges you are talking about are to a very large extent reduced. I'm not saying that it can be prevented totally. It's referring to stereotypes and biases and prejudices. But when you have strong accountability mechanism, it helps. And that is what brings me to something I said earlier, the Ferguson issue, which is that when people argue that sometimes when institutions are too robust in holding people accountable for misconduct, police officers will recoil into their shells and avoid being proactive. Literature does not support that. But it's also true that at this particular moment, when such report comes out, it is true and it is very important that the top hierarchy, the various commanders, would reassure the men and the women that the process was fair. And that is why I think that sometimes when the ministry are putting out such reports, they should take time to break down the methodology, the processes. You can anonymize the names so that the ordinary police officer, man, woman, would know that it was decent and the procedure was fair.
We have to say that the report has not been made public. We're all speaking based on what the content of the press release from the information minister is. But at the end of the day, you take an instance like this, the police commander comes to make a press statement. Yeah, we're supposed to believe them. Now we're told in that statement that 21 officers of the service would have to be investigated. Of course, there has to be interdiction and all that following the service rules. Does that mean that all 21 were guilty? What should be done? How do we distinguish what the committee report says and then what could become a case for prosecution in law?
Yeah, I think that you said something very true, and it is not peculiar, it's not distinct to this committee. I think that time and again, when such committees' reports are finalized, you need another source to get access to those documents, and I'm sure that you might get them with time. But yes, 21 people. I'm yet to know the ranks of the people, their position. But some have also argued that, for example, if you train officers with a particular mindset, and they have a certain view of how to respond to policing needs, and they don't know an alternative means, and then they commit such blunder. Is it fair to only hold those who really pull the trigger accountable, but you need to hold people at higher levels to account? I think that that's an important school of thought. But let me end up on this note. If you have a question, I take, which is that such sad situations offer the country tremendous opportunity. It's sad, but out of the sadness, out of the pain, we can have something positive. What is that? Which is this, that when such issues happen, very often you have the committee report pinpointed at what had happened. I think that such events would give us the opportunity to look at policing generally. So, for example, some have argued that is it about time that we decentralize policing, that every region will have some level of autonomy in terms of policing. The reason is
for example, like they have in the US, you have a state that have their, or a county that have their own police force.
But that is a federal, we are a unitary state.
Yeah.
But it is something similar. The idea is that if every region has its regional commanders as the apex and report, of course, to the Minister for Interior, the idea is that when something happens in, for example, Brong-Ahafo region, you will not smear the other regions with the same.
So then you say maybe BA police unit or
BA police, exactly. And then when they are best practices, you don't need to go to Britain because they are very disciplined, very professional police officers. Then you can say that, okay, based on this particular issue, police officers from this region have best practices, and we can adopt that. And I think that when we are able to think about that, maybe it will bring some added value.
Maybe your conversation can engender that sort of debate. But at the end of the day, we seem to be, based on what the press statement is and we're told is the outcome of the committee's report, seem to be now only focusing, ambassadizing the police, if you look at the general conversation. On the other hand, what is too much so that it doesn't destroy the morale?
They're talking about the Ferguson effect, and that's what I started from. The Ferguson effect studies there. I'm not saying that what applies in America would necessarily apply to Ghana. In other words, in America, there was no evidence to support the fact that the Ferguson effect, after Michael Brown had been killed, there was more robust oversight and accountability mechanism were sharpened. And so the fear was that you demoralize the police at the minimum from being proactive. So that's the genesis of the Ferguson effect. But studies have not proved that. So to your question, we need to balance. You see, when you hold people accountable, what you do is that you give more credibility to the institution, because then people will trust that the institution, apart from its internal mechanism to hold their people accountable, there's also an external body that can also be another layer to hold the institution accountable to individual misconduct. But you're also right in saying that sometimes, and I've alluded to that earlier on, that sometimes the individual misconduct, in not all cases, are because of the resources and the type of training. And so when you're looking at how to get the best police service, normally I would recommend, and one of the most brilliant criminologists we have, he's a Ghanaian at Cambridge, Justice Tankabi. I think he's one of the leading experts on legitimacy, and I would urge Ghana to use that man. What he has proposed, which I think it's fairly solid, is that we should have, even if the police council is doing that, we can refine what they do, is to have an independent police commission. Now, what the independent police commission will do is to receive and investigate all complaints of police misconduct, including such events. And then another body or the same body dealing with the general welfare of the police, because welfare of officers are very important. Welfare, how they are operating. When you're able to have those two focus, I'm sure that it will help the police service reform. But you are right in saying that at a point, and I always say that, okay, let me take a step back. You see, police service by virtue of...
Live from the University of Ghana, Legon, Roland Walker in that interaction with security analyst Emmanuel Sowate on the 21 police officers who the Information Ministry has told us should be interdicted for their involvement in the shooting and killing of some 7 persons in Manso-Nkwanta. Well, the Daily Graphic report says that speaking to David Eklu, he says the police have not received any communication from the Interior Ministry and only hearing of what the Information Ministry has said. So there's still a lot more to come on this issue.